if you've got the right attitude and you've got integrity, I says, you can take that to the bank and cash it. You give me a horse, I could break a horse, I could milk a cow and, and farm machinery, by the time I was 12, 13-year-old, I was running a farmhand,
Yeah.
So, those were good learning seasons. My dad had a 49 Chevy pickup, and that baby is what I learned to drive in. I woke up and went to the Christmas tree, and there was a Pinto Colt in the living room, and he had my attention big time.
Every kid has asked for a pony for Christmas. Not very many of them have actually gotten one.
Yeah, and especially in the living room.
Hey there, and welcome to From the Ground Up Show, the show where we encourage and inspire the next generation of free-thinking leaders by telling the stories of those that have been there, done that, and are still getting it done, building a life that they love with their hearts, their hands, and their hustle. I'm your host, Eric Loden. If you guys enjoy the content, help me out, like, share, follow, subscribe, all the things. If you can leave us a 5-star review, or especially if you leave a comment on Apple Podcast or whatever podcast platform you're listening on, that really helps us move up in the algorithms, and we really appreciate it. If you are on podcast and would like to see the video version, it is available on YouTube as well, From the Ground Up Show. As you guys probably noticed, we are in a new studio today. We're pretty excited to have this up and running and not be sharing another space. But with that transition, there's been a few adjustments. We're still figuring things out. So if you guys would have some patience with me, I know there's a few quirks in the video and have some weird focus boxes popping up and stuff. We'll get that all taken care of over the next week or so. And we should have a lot better quality audio, better quality video, and much cooler space. So if you guys would just have some grace with us this week, we are super excited to welcome you to the new studio, and this will be our first show here. Today, I am really excited to be joined in our new studio by Bob Zimmerschied. Bob is a local businessman that has owned a number of different businesses in a number of different fields. He's a bit of a serial entrepreneur, owning restaurants, hardware stores, and real estate holdings. Bob is a husband, a father, and a follower of Jesus. So, Bob, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad to be here, but I'm still very nervous because I haven't done anything like this. And since I am supposed to be retired, I've tried to kind of, I got rid of some of my books and things when I moved. And so this will be a new experience for me.
Good deal. Well, we're glad to have you here. And we can dive right in. So, Bob, the first thing we usually do with all guests is just learn a little bit about you. Can you tell us about your childhood and life growing up?
Well, I'm sure there's some things that I shouldn't say, but these things that I'm going to tell you probably are filtered out of many memories, and some of them are not too fresh. I was born into a rancher's family. I was the first child out of 4. And I was also the first grandchild. My dad's parents had passed on before I was born, but my mom's dad and mom were very influential in my life and great supporters. And being the first grandchild, I think I had a bit of sweetness in my relationship with them. As I say, my folks were ranchers. They'd only owned the ranch for about 2 years before I came along. And back in those days, now a little farther on, when I was about in the first grade, we got electricity at the ranch. So this goes back a ways. Yeah. Yeah. The REA holes in the ground and get power in there. And that made a big difference for us kids growing up there. But for the first 6 years or so, I didn't have that advantage. And it's probably kind of why I ended up choosing the career path that I was thinking I was on. But anyway, we raised cattle, and we used saddle horses to make that happen. And one of my first memories of really fond memories was a Christmas. And I've seen pictures of it, but I can't tell you exactly how old I was. But I was probably in either the 5 years old or maybe 6. And Christmas morning, I woke up and went to the Christmas tree, and there was a Pinto colt in the living room. And he had my attention big time. I named him Teddy Bear. And he was with me all the way through growing up, and even when I met my wife and took her to the ranch to meet my parents, I took her for a ride on Teddy Bear and give her a little cruise across some of the ranch property with her on Teddy Bear. And it was so memorable for me, but I enjoyed that particular memory really good, especially as I was thinking about doing this podcast for you, Eric.
Every kid has asked for a pony for Christmas. Not very many of them have actually gotten one.
Yeah, and especially in the living room. So, and I think of not only that, but I think of Christmases. And there were several things in my growing up years that Christmas gifts that meant so much and actually kind of started me on a different, on a career path. And so I'd share some of those with you. One of the ones was let's see here, I'm going to find that. Of course, Teddy Bear. And then I got a BB gun, which was really kind of special. Most boys love BB guns, but I've got a grandson that has got one, but he is real hesitant to get a hold of it. But if I get enough time with him, I think we can start making it work for him.
My 4-year-old has been begging for
okay,
for a
yeah.
while now,
Okay, Dad. And another thing that came along was a microscope. And I might have been maybe just starting into high school or something like that when I got the microscope. But I remember hatching shrimp with a microscope, and that was so cool. And growing little bacteria and that kind of thing. You'd go out and pick up a bale of hay or something like that and grab the stuff underneath it, and then you put it in some warm water and watch what happens to it over several days. The other thing, and it was a big deal in my life and still is, if you were to step into my man cave, you would see I've got a stack of guitars, and it all started with this Roy Rogers guitar. And I played that thing when it was still in the box under the Christmas tree, pretending. And finally I got the thing out of the box and after Christmas, and I had a teacher come along who played the piano. And so he taught me how to play some chords. And so then that started me on that path. My oldest sister, she was 2 years younger than she was taking piano lessons then later on in grade school. And so we would start jamming a lot. And so that was one of the things I remember. We had lots of things that my parents did for us, and they didn't have a lot of resources. So my dad, he worked hard. My mom was always creative and trying to figure out ways to bring in some extra money. But they got us kids into 4-H. They got us into swimming lessons in the Keyhole Reservoir. And we just had a great growing up season. And so I got through that childhood and got ready for grade school. It turns out my first grade teacher, I thought she was the cutest and loveliest and the sweetest person I'd met yet. And I still think that, but she ended up marrying my dad's hired man. And so, but that was after several years. And she only taught 1 year for me, for my first grade year. And she's still living. So she's a sweetheart.
Oh, man. Well, I've known you for a long time. I did not know that you played the guitar. Do you play publicly ever?
That's in my past. There was that's interesting. You had asked me if I still do. I do. But I play with my sister, and I used to play with my best buddy that we used to jam together. And we used to travel a different states. We traveled to Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota, and played mostly in bars and dance halls and that kind of thing. So, and then I played some when I was in college too. And actually I made enough money to kind of get through college with that, along with some other things too. But anyway, it's one of those things. When I got married, I had a tough call because I had been playing, and there were so many people in that culture. If they play music and you start jamming, I was always getting calls to jam. And so I finally says, this is going to affect my marriage. So I sold everything except my old basic electric guitar.
Okay.
And I still have it, but then I've upgraded a little bit since then.
Collected a few more along the way.
And I just lost one of my best man that was in my wedding. And he and I were such good buddies all the time growing up. We lost him at the Veterans Hospital there at Fort Meade 2 summers ago. We would jam together. He, my sister, and I would get together and had some really great times in the last few years. But I did have to get back into it and bought some used equipment. I can make noise anyway now.
What's your favorite guitar that you've owned? Have you had any really cool ones?
Oh yeah, one I have cool is a 335 Gibson.
Yeah,
and I found that on Craigslist, I think it was. And a guy that had served in Vietnam, and his wife, and he was playing in a band when he was in the service. And his wife went to Gibson and said, "Hey, would you build this guitar for my husband?" And so they said, "Okay." And they built him one. And it turned out the quality control was not where it should be on that guitar. And so she complained to the company, and the CEO of Gibson sent her a letter and apologized and says, "We're going to make you a special guitar for that mess up." Wow. And so I have this special order Gibson that I bought over Craigslist, and it's sitting there in my man cave. And I love it. It's just very cool.
That's great.
And then my wife's siblings discovered that her mother used to play a steel guitar, a lap steel. And it turns out that it just kind of got stored away. And they wanted me to kind of check it out. So I got it out, and the tuning knobs had just completely deteriorated. They just turned to dust. And it was one of those Don Ho jobbers, from the Hawaiian days when he was playing on TV. But so I got it refinished and stuff. But that's not my flavor. I don't do but I still have it. And, somebody will need it someday, and I'll figure out where it should go. But I don't have my old Roy Rogers guitar anymore. But anyway, after 8th grade, they consolidated the school district where I was, because when my mom was teaching there and my first grade teacher was there, it was a 1-room schoolhouse, and she taught whatever needed to be taught in 1 through 8 grades.
Okay.
And the year I graduated 8th grade is when they consolidated and moved all of the country schools into town, and they bused us. So we had to ride 30 miles into town every day on the bus.
So how many of you were there in that?
Well, I think there was about 8 of us, 7 or 8, depending on, because when I was there was a 7th grader, 8th grader, and they moved on. And I remember those guys give me so much hard time. Elvis Presley was big in those days. And they started teasing me that I was Elvis, and that I needed to shake around when I was playing and stuff. So that was kind of weird. So anyway, but the schoolhouse was there. And in fact, my first grade teacher, she bought an old schoolhouse and moved it over to her place and refinished it and kind of refurbished it to make it look like it would have 50 years ago. And it's still standing there somewhere, but she's gone on. Her ranch is now, it's about 8-10 miles from where our ranch was. It was over on the edge of the Black Hills, Powder River side of the Black Hills. So.
So what was town that you got bused to go to school?
Moorcroft. Yeah. I didn't know. I mean, I'd been around 4-H kids and stuff like that, but we just pretty much played among ourselves and relatives. And so that was most of my social with peers until I went to high school. And that was kind of a big step for me. I know that high school was big and seemed awful big, and I was nervous about that too, but I started loving science projects or science classes. Didn't, of course, have physics or anything like that, but we had science, chemistry and organic chemistry, and of course, algebra and trigonometry. Those were things that I really liked, math and science. And so it wasn't long before teachers were pulling me and another one of my classmates to head to the School of Mines in Rapid City.
Okay.
And so I signed up to do electrical engineering, and started off in Rapid City then there. And the thing that's would have changed my life if they wouldn't have had any 3-2 beer. I found that, and that put a pretty heavy drag on my school. And I made it 2 years. And by that time, the Vietnam War was really roaring, and they were drafting people right and left. And my mother, she says, you're not going to get drafted. Let's go and talk to the recruiter. And we went to National Guard there in Spearfish, and I signed up for the National Guard. And then I ended up staying 7.5 years in the National Guard. And it really helped me financially because weekend drills, they paid pretty good. And over the years, I took my MOS, the type of skill that I learned was construction and dynamiting. And I love that C4 and all of those debt cable and stuff like that. So that was a good gig for me, and I enjoyed it a lot.
I'm learning all kinds of new things today. So did you end up in Vietnam?
No, I didn't. I wanted to go so bad. And, when I went to the School of Mines, one of the requirements there was to be in ROTC. And so I had some experience with that, just the basic drill formations and things, and some classes. And I liked that. Okay, that was fun. And then when I got to boot camp and doing guard duty and stuff during the middle of the night and stuff, your mind wanders. And I kept thinking, oh, man, I want to get into this and do my part. But I started thinking, I'm stuck here, so I just make the best of it. And it wasn't long before I was able to, time just moved by slowly then, but it seems like fast now. But I got to ride that old bus home, and that was quite a treat. Riding all the way from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri to back to Moorcroft. That was a real treat. Looking at the country and dreaming about being back home.
Yeah.
So, and that was only, 4 months or something like that I had to be in, or 5, maybe 6 months, maybe for the boot camp and AIT. Anyway, that was another one of those little gigs, and it turned out okay. I was able to get some income off of it. And did I mention about the time my dad went to and this was when I was in grade school, he went to an auction, and there was some brown Swiss milk cows, and he ended up bringing them home along with a hand crank cream separator.
Oh boy.
And so that turned out to be a good thing for the family because it brought in some extra bucks. And we ended up having to ship the cream either down at the post office. It was 6 miles to the post office. But we'd take the cream down there and the mailman would pick it up sometimes. Or the other way was to take it on the bus with us when we rode to town. And the mail bus driver or the school bus driver would drop it off. Beans on the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so anyway, my folks really did find ways to make it happen. After I graduated from high school, my sister and I, of course, were playing music. And so we decided we would put in for a summer job. And we ended up looking at dude ranches down in the Durango, Colorado area. But one of the ones that really hooked us was the one up at Dayton. And right at the mouth of Trevor, there was a dude ranch there. And so she became working in the kitchen and in the laundry, and I became a wrangler. And then, of course, we'd play music for the dudes in the evening. So that was a really fun time. The first year I was a wrangler and learned about the horses and that. And so then they hired me back the second year because the corral boss, the main guy, decided he didn't want to do that anymore. So they made me the corral boss.
Okay.
But I, had all experience with teddy bear and, lots of horses and 4-H and that kind of thing. And so I knew all 50 head and I could pretty well match the rider with the horse. And that worked out pretty well. Huh. I only lost one time when we were headed back and horses, they kind of, some of them especially like to head to the barn. And this old buckskin horse, I had a young kid on him, and we started back heading, and this is up on the foothills of the mountains right above Dayton. And he wanted to head right home. And that horse took off with that kid, and I had to really hustle to catch him. But I couldn't catch him until the kid he'd fallen off. Oh. And so I had to go through all of the well, how bad are you hurt and all of that stuff. So, but that was kind of a rough ride right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet so. That might be a tough one to explain to the parents when you did that.
Yeah. Well, and the parents were probably there, so that was okay. But that was one of my worst problems. The other thing that happened when I was at the Dude Ranch is that I was bringing some horses that needed to go to the sale ring. That was back in the days when you could sell them for different things besides being used.
Is that the diplomatic way to word it?
I think so. But as I was driving this truck, it's a straight truck, and I probably had about 4, 5, 6 horses in there. I don't remember how many. But I was headed to the sale barn in Sheridan. And right there at Ranchester, there was a long driveway, and it had kind of a blind corner for driving out. And darn if this 15-year-old kid didn't have his dad's Jeep pickup, and he was learning to drive, I guess. And I don't know, he pulled right out in front of me. And so I had to take the borrow pit with that truck and those horses. Took the bumper off of his Jeep, but the horses, they only one of them got cut real bad, but it threw me through the windshield, and I got a brain concussion out of it. Okay. And so I don't remember too much about the very accident in itself, but I woke up in the hospital, and through that whole episode, I was okay. Everything came out all right. I got a settlement out of it, and $500 so I could buy a '59 Chevy. And that was my first car.
Okay.
Because otherwise I wouldn't have had a car. And so then that was a good experience at the Dude Ranch, really, when the bad things turned out better.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And so I imagine that was just a summertime job.
It was, yeah. I worked 2 summers there.
And so that was while you were in college, you worked that?
Yeah. Yeah, that was, well, that kind of takes us up to my time with the National Guard and that. And so I wanted to finish school. There's something in me that I was just trying to think of the right word, but I know there is a right word for it, but I couldn't remember it. But I just like to finish things once I start. And it turns out that was something that was just eaten on me. I'd got 2 years under my belt, and then had this interruption with the National Guard. So I got situated so that I could go back to school, and I ended up buying a mobile home in Laramie. And the idea was to live in part of it and rent out part of it. Okay. So that would help make the payments. And so my dad co-signed with me, and that was really helpful. And my parents, oh my gosh, they were so helpful. Just all the way through my life, they're just the best parents you could ask for. So I started back to school, and I worked road construction, and I went to work for the Forest Service some in building roads up around Hog Park. And then I worked on the interstate when they were building I-80 across there, out there by Quayle Dome. And that was a brutal winter job I had, working on a rock crusher and the dust and stuff. And it just was not a healthy situation. But I survived it and made some good money and got back to school. And along with all of my other music and stuff like that, I took a job bartending and at the country club. And it wasn't long before I was managing the country club bar. And so it just worked out for me. I got in the right time and all of that. And that was a pretty good job. It really was. The clientele were so helpful, many of them, and my goodness, you kind of learn to be a counselor when you're in that business. And a lot of those folks took me under their wing and just really helped me out as far as like making my way through school. And in fact, they tried to hire me. One guy, the guy was managing the country club. He owned a bunch of liquor stores, and they wanted to build a motel. And so the Holiday Inn in Laramie, if you ever stay there, they tried to hire me to manage that before I graduated. And I decided, no, I'm going to stick with what I'm doing. And besides that, I was starting to feel like, oh man, I need to settle down here. I was 26 years old, and I'd met the love of my life. And I'll tell you what, God placed a perfect person in my life when Jen and I got married. You've heard behind every successful man, there's a very important woman. Well, that is my wife of 54 years now.
Congratulations.
Going on 55 here.
Wow. There's not many people that can say that.
Well, it's been a ride. I'll tell you that. So it's been good. been really good. She backed me in all the pursuits of my dream to be my own boss. And, this little session with you, Eric, has been helpful for me because it's caused me to be a lot more thankful about what I put her through, because she stuck with me the whole way. And it's amazing. She had a different point of view on most things than I did. But, the thing that really helped me a lot later on is that she has this ability, and she had that with me. She could read me. And I think you call it intuition or something like that. And she could just, tell if there was needed to do this or that. So she just kind of kept me focused. But anyway, before we got really organized, and of course I talked about, didn't I, that I went to work for the power company as soon as we got married. No, I didn't.
So maybe not.
No, I don't know if I did or not. I made these notes, and sometimes I kind of lose my focus on this. Yeah. But anyway, I went to work for the power company, and I loved that job. They gave me a company car. They hired me for a special project. And so I got to be based in an engineering office in Casper. And my job was to travel all through their territories that they served. And that was central Wyoming, northern Wyoming, and to study what the distribution system was like, and what are the challenges that is going to happen in these different circuits over the next 5 years. And so it was a very interesting job. But I didn't work there too long, and then pretty soon I realized that this job, and I was around the other engineers, and I could see the way this career was going to go is that they promote you and move you. They promote you and move you. And so I could see myself landing in Portland, Oregon, or someplace in the West Coast, and that wasn't going to set well with me. Jan was born in Wyoming. I was born in Wyoming. Her parents lived in Pine Bluffs, and then after we got married, they ended up moving down to Colorado, northern Colorado. But my folks were on that ranch, and I'll tell you, my dad, he lived and breathed that ranch. It was his baby, and he really, I think, he wanted me to take over that ranch. But I just had this inclination to make my own way. And so that's kind of the way I kept pushing. Okay. But when I was with the power company, it wasn't long until I saw that a promotion thing that was going to make it some place where I didn't want to live. And my job at the Dude Ranch, I got attached to the Bighorn Mountains real good. And I did not want to have to leave that part of it. So even when I was in Casper, I would come up here on weekends a lot and went into Seven Brothers and all of that. So I just thought, I'm not going to move too far from the Bighorns. Okay. But and I knew my job with the power company was not going to be compatible with that plan. But one of the guys that I was working with, he was big on tracking the stock market, and he made a lot of investments. And I wasn't in the office a ton of time, but I was probably half of the time. And he was always talking about the stock market, and he got me kind of interested in that. And so he talked about McDonald's a lot. And so I started looking at it, and I thought, oh yeah, that would be fun. That's something I could do and be my own boss and decide where I wanted to be.
Okay.
And so Jan and we started making appointments to investigate different franchises, because I thought, I don't have a background in that. And if they just give me the layout, I'll execute. They got the strategy, I'll execute. Well, we ended up going to Denver and meeting with the Sambo's people. I don't know if you remember Sambo's restaurants. That's before your time.
Yeah.
Probably. They didn't survive too long. But then we met Village Inn people. I'd already investigated McDonald's and Burger King. And goodness sakes, back in those days, Eric, you still had to have $1 million net worth to get the door open. And so I could see that just wasn't going to work. And Jan and I, we were thrifty. Our marriage was going great, but we lived off of our cash in envelopes, so we knew where everything was going and how much it was going to be. So
Dave Ramsey would be proud.
And even I was participating in the power company's stock purchases and stuff like that. But anyway, that was a little exposure that later on turned into something I was very interested in.
So was that the first time you kind of got a inclination to become self-employed?
Well, it was kind of a process there. You know what happened? I realized that I wasn't going to get to live where I wanted to. There was a meeting. I was in a meeting. There was a bunch of, I say a bunch, there was probably half a dozen local managers, and they were the guys that run the retail office, you know, in the markets. And so they were having a meeting, and they started talking about different things. And the thing that really hit me, and I don't know, I think it's God's way of just cracking the door open or something. And they were talking about hiring engineers. And, you know, I thought I was a hotshot. I'll just be honest. God had a way of humbling me on many occasions. But at that time, and what happened is I got this gut feeling that I was a commodity. And if they needed an engineer, all they got to do is just put one on the budget and let them go. And so it wasn't something that I felt like I had any say in the way things would go or anything. So that was a kind of an inkling there. I'll never forget that.
That wasn't your plan. I mean, when you guys first got married and you took the job at the power company, you didn't have a plan to start your own business at that point in time?
I didn't. But I didn't know I needed to, you know. Yeah. But as we went along, it wasn't very long until I could see the bureaucracy in a big company.
Yeah.
And it's who you know and what they need. And so I just felt more like a pawn, I guess. And so that made me really start looking. And then, of course, him talking about McDonald's and then me wanting to look into franchises and stuff like that. So, and lo and behold, one day I was just looking through the classifieds in Casper paper. Here's a little A&W root beer stand in Buffalo.
Okay.
And of course, I'd been on the Bighorns and up there, and so yeah, we got to go look at this. So we bought this little 700 square foot concrete building and on leased ground, and we had to mortgage everything we had. I felt like we had to be all in on this, and so I met a banker on Sunday afternoon, and he financed us for it, and away we go. We bought it at the end of the season, and we struggled I went all through everything, used my skills to get the equipment up to snuff and all of that during the winter. And we would come up to Buffalo, and we were so Scotch. We didn't stay in a motel. We actually slept in the restaurant. And of course, there was no heat there or anything. So we would bring blankets and just sleep in the restaurant while we were working on the weekend. This is always on the weekend.
Yeah.
And then we had to go. We needed to. Jan was in on this. I mean, bless her heart. We ended up staying in the Occidental one night, and that was pretty uptown, really. And we had to share a bathroom. But that's how we got started, and that was an experience for sure.
Okay, so it was not open during that winter. You just spent the weekends through the winter getting it
ready
to go, and then that next summer launched and started going. Did you quit your job to come run?
I did.
The A&W?
Yeah. And Jan had been putting in for a teacher's job, and so she ended up having to quit her job down there, and then we had a mobile home that I had bought in Laramie, and so I moved it to Casper, and then we moved it to Buffalo.
Okay.
And so we were on a shoestring big time, you know.
Yeah.
But we made the leap. All of the guys in the engineering department, so many of them would say, I always wanted to go on my own. I always wanted to. But he says, it just takes guts. And, you know, I don't know if it takes guts or grit or what, but we did it. We did it. We were on a shoestring, seriously undercapitalized, but the banker liked us, and that performed a real long-term relationship with the bank, because I realized that you really had to have a good banker if you're starting out. And, geez, I was 26 years old, you know, so that I didn't have much. And I drove Volkswagens and, you know, pinched the miles out of that thing as best I could.
So what were those early years like? Did that first season prove productive? Did it take off pretty well, or?
It was awesome. We made one of the things that happened in there, and I don't remember exactly. I had to go to, because of the franchise requirements, I had to go to a training school in California. And I think I did that the second year, and would go to 2 weeks A&W school in Santa Monica. And that was a pretty big step. But the first year, we just kind of shoestringed it through, and I went up and worked and just observed the kitchen operation before they closed it that first year. And so I kind of knew what was going on, but I never cooked a hamburger like that. I didn't know how to mix a root beer, and I didn't know what a soft serve machine looked like. That first year was great, and especially when it opened it and it's busy, and man, the cash register was ringing, and we had cash, and it accumulated, and it's because it was a 7-day deal, And so at the end of the first year, we were feeling pretty positive about it. We ended up looking for some property to build a house.
Okay.
And so at the end of our second year, then we bought a property and got Dave Ennis to build the house for us. And during that time, we ended up going to the Wesleyan Church. Huh? And so we were living next door to a couple that was going to the church, and they invited us one Sunday. So we ended up going there and liking it. Jan grew up under the Missouri Synod Lutheran churches, and so it was kind of a freewheeling feeling for her.
Yeah.
But enjoyed it. And it turned out that we had so much time, so many good times with A&W and the Sunday school program there at the Wesleyan Church. We'd run promotions, you bring a guest, you get a free hamburger and stuff like that. So it was just fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great.
But we did. The second year, after the first year, we closed, and then I began plans for adding on. Okay. And so we doubled the size of the building, and this is on leased land, so the lease was cheap, but still, any investment we made into it was going, you're not going to get a return on it.
Yeah.
So, but we doubled the size in it, and Eric, the thing that is just makes me shudder. We were not on city ground there. We were in the county, and we had water from the city. We had a septic tank. And so the first thing you know, you've got lots of water coming in with water-cooled compressors and all that kind of stuff. And the septic tank was not designed for that at all. So I knew the clock was ticking, that my survival in that location was going to have to change. So that's when I started planning to buy that property next to us. And I had to figure out how we were going to get sewer and water into that, because that was in the city, but without city water and sewer. And as a developer, I guess I had to do the heavy lifting there. And that was a big chunk, because we had to follow up down by the county shop and go all the way across the highway into the north side of 16 right there.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a chore. And the agreement the city made with me says, okay, if anybody hooks onto it down the road, then we can get a proration and reimburse you some. But I never saw anything from that. But that's just, at least we got the new store open. And that was a stretch. And it was interesting when I listened to your dad talking about the roofing job on that building. That was just awesome. And that roof is still serviceable. I know it is. Yeah. That was great. That Hypalon is good stuff, I can tell you.
It is. We often have joked that maybe we made a mistake installing too good of a product.
Mm-hmm.
Here, 41 years in, just in the last few years, I've started to get to redo some of his earliest.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a really good, and so I didn't know it was his first project, commercial. I didn't know that, and it didn't matter. I was way in over my head, But the thing that really helped me build that building, and I'm not sure if I could have got it done otherwise, was when I was dreaming about all of this, buying the property and building this store, I met Steve Gonzalez. and Marge. And Steve, they had just moved from Oregon. His parents, he had taken over and run a drive-in there. And he was building his house. And when he says, when I get this house done, how about if I come and help you build that restaurant? I said, oh, that would be great. And so that helped me enormously.
Yeah.
And so between Steve and I, we got that thing built in pretty good time. And I know we planned it all. One of the things, a big mistake, I didn't know what the soil conditions were underneath that building. Huh. Turns out it's an old river bottom, and there's still a lot of river in it. And so we had the track hoe out there, and we're going to build a basement under that for the walk-in coolers. Well, it turns out that the track hoe would pick up the rocks and stuff, and the water would just follow the thing right up. So there was a huge amount of water there. So through that plan, we had to redesign the building then, because we had to move the walk-in cooler upstairs.
Yeah. And so this is during year 4?
This would be probably year 4.
Oh man. So that's,
that was in a little later than that. It was in 78. That's when it was. So yeah, it was probably year 3, maybe year 4.
Yeah. So it did take off pretty quick.
I had a good
everything you have into it the first year, and build a house the second year, and expand the business the third year.
Well, I had a good banker.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's, I never was afraid of too much debt, because I felt like I was going to make it pay. I just knew I could do it. I just had the confidence in it. And one of the things that happened when Steve and I started working together is that we found out about Zig Ziglar. And I have to give a shout out to him, because he changed my philosophy. And when you're in your late 20s and early 30s, it's kind of hard your head gets kind of hard. I was kind of hard-headed. But I found out about him, and I read his book, See You at the Top. And I went to several of his seminars, and I bought his cassette tape stuff, and I brought that with me, How to Stay Motivated. And I'm not kidding you. This inspired me, and my mom suffered from asthma, and I bought one of these for my mom, and it really gave her a big lift just to hear that encouragement and hear it often. It's just one of those things. And that was kind of his theory. You need motivation, and it's like bathing. You have to have it often. Motivation.
That's good.
But one of the things in this package here, you get about how to live longer and love it. And he talks about running. Kenneth Cooper was the doctor that talked about that. And when Ziglar would have these seminars, then he would talk about staying in shape or getting in shape, and what your body needed to do what God designed it to. And so Ziglar was way overweight, and he started running, and his story is a success story for running. But I listened to Cooper, and I'm not kidding you. I decided, okay, I'm going to start running. And so that was a big part of my, I think, success, because it gave me a way to deal with stress, frustration, and patience. And those were some things that I really had to work on. Thanks to him. And, there were just like him, there are so many books that I used that to train my managers. I would take a book, and then I would go through, and then I would make an outline, and then I would assign chapters so that they could start reading about it. And I just think that those things really helped me so many times. I couldn't have done it without it. No question.
You might have a hard time finding a way to play those Zig Ziglar tapes now.
Oh, I got some boom boxes. And I take the batteries out so that they don't get all corroded. But
good deal.
But and one of the things I was going to tell you about, when I was in Laramie going back to college, I signed up to get a certificate and to become trained in television repair.
Okay.
And so I got a job there, part-time job working for the appliance store there and fixing TVs and fixing 8-track tape decks. I tell you, those things were a nightmare for people because they would work good when they're new, but they didn't last very long. So I got to work on those things a lot.
There's a reason they were only on the scene for a short period of time.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, you had quite the varied background before you ever started in business then, doing engineering, construction, dude ranch, ranching, electronics repair. Is there any industry that you didn't work in until you started a restaurant?
I'm sure there is. I stayed away from the medical field. I can tell you that for sure.
It seems like about the only thing you hadn't done by the time you started a restaurant was food.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You give me a horse, I could break a horse, I could milk a cow. And farm machinery, by the time I was 12, 13-year-old, I was running a farmhand. Those were good learning decisions. My dad had a 49 Chevy pickup, and that baby is what I learned to drive in. And of course, maybe fence post didn't get out of the way quite a few times, but but it was a great time to grow up. I was just blessed. That's all there was to it. Options were everywhere. Yeah. Opportunities.
Do you think there are opportunities for a young person today as there were for you back then?
I think so. Over the years, we had lots of teenagers, and going back to the A&W, we had so many young people work for us, and they were just great kids. And then, of course, we were in it long enough that we ended up having their kids work for us too. But I think one of the things that was such a big thing, and it even worked for my kids, and I think that one of the things that I ran across, and it was just blessed my heart to remember, my son had plenty of difficulties in making his transition. And I and he picked up some of that from me because I was a slow learner. And I just I was so curious about everything. But this little thing here about attitude, Charles Swindoll had that. And I put that in all of my store manuals. I shared it with everybody that worked for me because nothing is more important than your attitude. And I think if you go at life with an attitude of, hey, I'm here, I'll do whatever, that it's going to work for you. Yeah. I used to tell kids that if you've got the right attitude and you've got integrity, I says, you can take that to the bank and cash it because so I really feel that that would still work.
I agree. I think the opportunity might look different today, but man, the industries that are opening up, and I think I wasn't there, so I can't speak to your generation, but it seems like my generation is lacking more of those people that have creativity, have a drive, have that integrity, and want to get out and do something themselves and make it. And so I think somebody that takes a little bit of integrity, creativity, and hard work, man, the industries, the opportunities that are available right now are limitless.
And you get a little grit when if there's something you want to do, you're able to push through running. And that's a great analogy because when you're in a race that you've prepared for and you get there and you want to beat your time, you're not running against anybody else. You're running against yourself.
Yeah.
You got to develop that grit to push through those hard times. I listened to one of your podcasts about your relative in Sheridan that's on the police force there, sheriff's office. It takes grit to get through those things. And I can remember running I ran a lot. I challenged myself to run 1,000 miles in a year.
Okay. And I remember that.
And then I challenged myself to run 100 miles a month, So, those things you got to push to get, but you have to figure out a way to motivate yourself. And going back to the restaurant, keeping track of what's going on, that was really important to me. I didn't know how important it was to know to have the right people at the right time. And if you track your sales on the hour, and I learned that at A&W training school. That was one of the things that say, you make your schedule, you forecast your sales, and then keep track of that, because it's so amazing. And this worked in Ace Hardware too, and Coast to Coast, is your things that happen on a yearly cycle. It's just amazing how they just keep happening. Mm-hmm. And you think, how do people, they just follow the same rhythm? And that works. So it's important to keep track of what's happening now so that you can look back on a year and anticipate, because that's the whole clue. I mean, you got to have the stuff on the shelf and everything so that you can deliver.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, would you mind reading that quote?
Oh, I would love to. This is just, the longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It is more important than the past, than the education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, than successes, than what other people think or say or do. It's more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, a home. The remarkable thing is that we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play the one string we have, and that is attitude. I'm convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. Charles Swindoll.
That's good.
I tell you, I use that so many times, and to be honest with you, I thought, where did I leave that? Coming up with this, but man, I go to my computer and start looking at that, and I used to send that almost every paycheck. And of course, I told you before, we've done payroll for 50 years. Every 2 weeks, we've done payroll. And so many times I've put in stuff like that in every paycheck. Just, like Ziegler says, you got to have motivation and you got to have it regularly. So
I've heard it said that you're not the CEO, you're the CRO, the Chief Repeating Officer.
That's exactly right.
About 50% of your job as a leader in a small business is repeating yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the other things that before we got into the hardware business, is I started teaching Sunday school and teaching adult Sunday school. And that really challenged me because you're talking to peers, but it was, God used that to help me develop so much confidence, and like in staff meetings and just encouraging my crew and that. So that was a blessing, really.
Yeah.
And then the pastors along the way, goodness sakes. They're great.
Awesome. Well, you've kind of brought us up through A&W, and you just mentioned a couple of hardware stores that you owned. Can you tell us the transitions that you made through the various businesses you've owned? I know there's quite a list there.
Yeah. Actually, before we leave the A&W, I just have to give a shout out to Steve and Marge Gonzalez, because without their help, I would have never been able to succeed at that restaurant. But after we built that, we were able to compete on a national level with the rest of the A&Ws. And there's something I learned in just getting ready for this time with you that I want to share, because it's just it's so fundamental, I think, in America. And it goes like this. After we built that store, the first year we received the regional A&W top recognition out of all of the A&Ws in the country. And at one time there was 2,200 in the States. Canada has had a number of A&Ws, and it's a kind of a separate organization. Mm-hmm. But we got the National Operator of the Year award in May of 1981. And so that was just, I wasn't expecting it. And it was just one of those things that they recognized how much we had done. We went from sales of about 70,000 a year, that was our annual take, to sales of almost 500,000. And then we did that in whatever it was, 5 years or something like that. we recognized for that. That was a real bonus. But the thing that I didn't know, and I just discovered this, is that the CEO of A&W spoke at that convention and it was in Reno, I think. And this is the information that he shared. And this is just as important now, I think, as it was back then, is to realize that we are on a very changing world around us. I mean, I talked about having electricity in my house when I was 6 years old and not having it before that. But this is how it was. In the beginning of the 80th, in the 80s, the average American is 30 years old, but the forecast for the decade of 80s, the teen segment in our population will decrease by 17%. The 25 to 34-year-old segment of our population will increase by 19%. The 35 to 44-year-old will increase by an astounding 51%. Those over 65 will increase by 23%. So that was the forecast in the early part of in 1980. And the other thing that happened is that over 1 million working women will enter the workforce, and average household income will increase by 70%. Those were huge forecasts of change. And it blew right past me. I had no clue. If I had paid attention to that, I would have had a much more successful financial experience.
Okay. What would you have done differently?
I think being aware, it's like, I'm not sure exactly the things I would have done, but there's another thing that I would have done. When I bought the Coast to Coast store, and that goes on with my story here, let me just tell you a little bit about that. The American consumer was on the move in the 80s. I think the American consumer is still on the move. But what happened in 1980 was that I had been shopping at the Coast to Coast store. In fact, I was there all the time because I was building and doing stuff, you know. And so I realized that the folks that owned that were getting close to retirement. And so Steve told me, he says, why don't you check in with them and see if the place is for sale? And so I did. And I talked to Glenn, the store owner, and I said, would you be thinking about selling anytime? And he said, well, you're the seventh guy to ask me that. So it was not just my observation. So anyway, I said, well, Glenn, I think I'm the right guy and I want to be the guy. And so I visited with him and he felt like I was the right guy. So the problem was, and this is what I would have changed and realized, is I had to pay 18% interest when I bought the Coast to Coast store. Mm-hmm. Now that is insane. Insane. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, that could wound you.
My generation is complaining about 4 and 5%.
Exactly. 18%. I don't know how I survived. I really don't. But anyway, that's what happened. And so even though it was a very foolish thing for me to do, I just did it. And that at that particular time in my life, I was learning to do spreadsheets and cash flow and all of that stuff. And I did it by hand, you know, on polymer pads. But then the small personal computer was coming along. And so I started learning how to do that. And one of the early programs, and I talked with my neighbors that owned the grocery store, the Dobbins. And so they were into learning BPI and some of these two accounting programs and things. So I knew all about that because I was doing it. And 1, 2, 3, Lotus, and Excel spreadsheets and stuff. I mean, that was all later. But anyway, that I had to really adapt constantly to the changing where I was at. And certainly running 2 stores, different stores, same market, but different stores, that required a lot of innovation on my part. And I learned it from Peter Drucker and all these guys, Henry Cloud And oh my gosh, there was so many of those. I brought a list of them here too. So I resurrected some of those books just because they were so important to me. And I just used one of them that comes to my mind, Steve got for me, and it's called The 13 Fatal Errors Managers Make and How to Avoid Them. And now that book, I broke that into pieces and I used it hundreds of times teaching people how to work in my store. And the deal is it's kind of like you tell somebody to go paint the barn red, but there's a million colors of red, you know? What do you mean? So that's a trick. And that's where I say running was my release from frustration and just kept me centered, really. So if I hadn't started running, I don't think I would have survived.
Okay.
I really don't.
So you were running A&W and Coast to Coast at the same time.
At the same time, yeah. And I let Steve run the A&W, and then I learned the Coast to Coast because it was the same process. I had to learn how to do that stuff, you know.
Yeah. How long did you have both stores?
Long time. But the A&W, we ended up converting to a Hardee's, and I think that might have been in the late 80s. And part of the reason was I felt like we were going to have some serious competition, and I wasn't prepared for that. I'd done some investigating, and I felt like our market was such that it would support a fast food breakfast. And so I really leaned into that. And that's why I ended up going with the Hardee's. And that was kind of a struggle. That was one of my biggest mistakes that I have ever made, and was choosing to remodel the A&W into a Hardee's. And the reason why it was something I did not understand was my customer base. It's a totally different, well, not totally, but it's a different customer base. And so I almost had to rebuild all of my customers. And it was hard. They had a very complicated system. And as you can tell, the one that we have now is closed. And I mean, it takes a big market to support those guys, and they're complicated, way more difficult than A&W was. And there's it's a complex menu. You have a lot of, and the other thing is too, the franchise, they just nail you for everything. They nail you for the franchise fee, and then you got to pay the royalty, and you're supposed to get, and then they nail you for advertising because they want to do all of this. That's why they see the whole big picture that you're going to start supporting the whole chain. And it's tough, really tough. And so I'm not surprised that the folks, and what happened is kind of like in the ranching business too. And I hate to say this, but I see small ranches turn into bigger ranches and bigger ranches and bigger ranches. And theoretically, I guess it's for productivity. You're going to get more productivity, but it changes the landscape constantly when that's happening.
Yeah.
So, but it's just a way America works, I guess. You know, you always want to get bigger, and I'm not so sure. And I learned that bigger isn't always better. You know, it depends on your personality, how serious you are about delivering the very best you can, because you just can't scale up as easy as it sounds. You know, you hear about all these mergers and stuff like that, but it's tough. In a small business, it's tough.
Especially small communities.
Yes.
A lot of trust with small businesses that the new big thing that doesn't always transfer.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So what was it that caused you to decide to sell what then became Hardee's and focus specifically on the hardware store?
Well, I could tell the longevity of the hardware store was better. Although there were some really difficult times. I tell you, there was times the Coast to Coast store is a co-op, and there's a difference between co-op and a franchise. As a co-op, you had to buy stock in the company to take the benefits that they had to offer. For example, like the warehousing and deliveries and even the marketing and that kind of thing. And Coast to Coast had a great philosophy. They wanted to be very customer oriented. And when the Menards, and when the Home Depots and the Lowe's and all of those big boxes started becoming a thing, the small operators started getting panicky because this was going to take away their store. And so they convinced the Coast to Coast group was a sitting, and they had merged over the years with several other small chains. And so it was not something new. But when the big push was for True Value, which was a much bigger chain or bigger organization, bigger co-op than what ours was, they convinced this Coast to Coast. We all had to vote, but they carried the vote. So we ended up merging with True Value. And it was two different philosophies and two different accounting systems, two different ordering systems. Everything's different. And you'd have this situation where you'd have a True Value store on one side of the street and a Coast to Coast on the other side. And that just didn't work very good. So I don't know. Let's see here. Coast to Coast was a great enterprise for quite a few years. But then when that all started happening, I think that was about in the late 80s. And they called the new part of True Value True Serve. And it just, the merchandise was poor. How can you sell oranges that are not fresh and good to eat? The duct tape that we used to get from True Serve, it was junk, just junk. And how can you even go to work and try to sell stuff like that? Because it reflects on you. So anyway, I could see the trouble. And Ace was out there, totally different company, but they came knocking on my door and they says, come join Ace. And I said, because one of the things that I always did when I was in the restaurant is loyalty is a real important factor. I like a loyalty with my team, and I like to stay loyal to, and there's got to be a good reason to not be loyal. Mm-hmm. So they convinced me that they wanted me to listen to their program. So and I got to back up here a little bit, because along the way, I decided that I needed something to do when I sold out the business. And this is a long time ago. And so I said, I'm going to invest in the stock market. And so I got interested in NAIC, which is a National Association of Investment Clubs. And they had a philosophy and provided training and software and that. So I talked to a number of people and we got an investment club going. And so we had some software we used to evaluate the quality of an enterprise. And with Ace, I plugged their numbers in. I was so impressed. I says, okay, tell me what you got. So they said, we'll take you to Orlando and put you up, you and your wife, and all you have to do is just listen to our program. So I did that. I was there for maybe 30 minutes, and I was convinced in my mind that this was the direction I should go. Jan wasn't even, we were on the ropes. I was so nearly bankrupt that it was not even, I didn't have anything I hadn't mortgaged, everything I had. So I went back later for lunch with Jan, and I said, honey, we got to do it. So Ace came in and they saved my hardware business. They really did. They bought all my paint because the paint is very specific for whatever you have, and you got the stuff. And if you can't use what you got, what are you going to do? Just pour that down the drain, So that was a hassle. But anyway, Ace said, we'll buy your paint. And they'd already taken us to Orlando, and it was on Mother's Day weekend. I will never forget that. That Omni Hotel put on a spread Jen and I had never seen before. My gosh, it was beautiful. So, but I came back and I had a staff meeting. I told all of my team at the Coast to Coast store, I says, I got some good news and I got some bad news. I says, the bad news is that we're going to get a divorce. And they, I says, we're going to divorce True Serve and we're going to join and get married to Ace. And that's the good news. And so they came in with a team and repriced everything or retagged everything in the store. when they didn't have exact matches on a lot of it because they didn't have junk. They had quality stuff, and that's what it takes. You can't make a living selling junk. That's just all there is to it. But yeah, and that's when I learned in retail, it's like a three-legged stool. You've got to have service, quality, and price. You cannot be best in any one of those things. You got to be best in two. You can't be best in all. That's the right words. So, and that's kind of the way it was. We had quality and we had service. And so we had to charge whatever it took. And, you know, and listening to some of your podcasts and roofing, I mean, that's exactly the way you operate. You had to have quality, and quality gives you survival.
Yeah. 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 That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. That's kind of been our approach to business is quality and service. And if you want quality and service, you got to be willing to pay a little bit more.
Well, it's going to pay you off in the long run.
Yeah. And if you want the lowest price, you're going to give up either quality or service or both.
Yep. Exactly
So,
right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. So,
but I learned that through the time with Ace Hardware. You know what was kind of interesting to me, at least, was the CEO of Coast to Coast. Of course, when the merger happened, they booted him. He was gone. And then it wasn't too long, and when I went to Ace, he was already a VP at Ace. And he was such a great guy. Oh, and then he went on to become CEO of Ace Hardware.
Okay. Yeah, so you're working with the same people.
Yeah, they had the philosophy, you know, and the philosophy really is that we are there to serve the customer. When you buy something, we've got your back, you know, because what Ace could do is then make the connection all the way back to the person that made it, you know, the manufacturer and the distributor and stuff. So we were to the customer. So the customer was in the link, in the circle of products.
And so it was when you switched from Coast to Coast to Ace and went all in on Ace, that's when you sold Hardee's and focused solely on building an Ace Hardware?
No. We switched at the existing store we had, which was the old Safeway store where Rewrite is now. And so that's where we switched. After we bought Coast to Coast, we expanded Coast to Coast. I rented the building from Glenn, but I saw a building across the street that was bigger. And so I started working with it, and he wanted to rent it to me. I said, I don't want to be under the thumb of a landlord. So I said, you got to sell it to me. So I ended up buying the thing. And of course, he had to say, I want the caveat here is you got to buy, or he said, I'll buy it. You put it up. It's got to have a placard on the front of the building because it belongs to that. It started out from his mother, you know. So I think if you go down on Main Street and look across, you'll see that placard, that bronze thing says, this is the Nepper building or something like that.
Okay. So at what point was it that you decided you needed to be done with Hardee's?
Well, I wanted to build a new store. I wanted to build a new Ace
store. You sold it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to build an Ace Hardware store, and I tried to do it downtown. I really wanted to do it downtown because I wanted to support the downtown merchants and that. But I tried to buy buildings next to me, and that just was really cost prohibitive. And so I said, but I'm not doing it until I get rid of the restaurant. And so, Eric, it probably took me 10 years to get rid of the restaurant.
Really?
Yeah. And so that's one of the things, and I know one of the things on your questions is, what advice do you have for getting rid of? Sorry. Anyway, I knew I had to get rid of that. And so my advice is it's going to take longer and probably have to give more up on your price than you want. Okay. There's just not that many buyers out there.
Yeah.
Depends on what it is. You know, I know. But if you don't have a really good, if you don't have a good profit margin, and that was the problem with that, it's hard to sell. It's just like trading horses. If you got a bad horse, you don't want it. Well, you got to take the hit. He's only going to live so long, and at some point, you're going to have to put him down. And you can't sell it. I actually bought a horse that should have been put down. And so I took it back and got my money back. But it took some doing.
So were you able to get what you wanted to out of the store, or did you have to give up quite a bit on price when you finally sold it? The Hardee's.
The Hardee's. I was willing to take about whatever I could get. And so I got pretty much what I wanted, but it was a struggle. I still owed on it, so I didn't have a lot of cash to take out.
Gotcha.
But it was more, and it would have been an okay kind of a business for somebody who wanted to run it themselves, but you couldn't afford to hire a manager and run it.
I think that's a trend I see a lot in these small town communities that we live in is, the people that own a lot of the businesses downtown, rather than owning a job, they own their business. They cannot pay themselves to run it and also pull a profit. They either work for free and make a profit, or they pay themselves and the business breaks even. And it puts them in a tough spot when they're ready to exit.
That's right.
Or move on, because there's not a lot there to sell.
Right. I was basically just running it to train managers, and I had some great people working for me. I love the people. That was one thing. You got to love people if you're going to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, that is very evident with you. You've always been very outgoing and just loved people and cared for people and really poured into people, even those that don't work for you.
Yeah. Well, and it turns out, I still go back to Ziegler, you have to be friendly and you have to look friendly. That was in my handbook. I said, if you got somebody that walks within 10, 15 feet of you, you got to recognize them and speak to them.
Yeah.
And you got to look friendly, so that's not always easy to do, but you got to do it.
I'm not sure I would be cut out for that business. So yeah, we've talked about, you had a lot of different jobs, careers. You worked in engineering, construction, ranching, food ranching. You've run 2 different restaurants, a number of hardware stores in different locations. What was the most difficult thing you faced in your various careers and various businesses?
Well, I had a lot of them, and so it'd be a little hard to sort out which was the most difficult. I go back to the thought occurred to me about the A&W when we first started. It was just we just got going. We went from a little 700 square foot building and into a 3,000 foot building. And I had this vision of a nice drive-in restaurant with the canopy. You pulled in under the canopy. You had the menu there. You could order from your car. We'd bring it out to you. It wasn't very long where there was a virus going on or something. And all of a sudden, a lot of the teenagers got sick. And so we didn't have the staff to deliver the food out to the cars. So I had this beautiful canopy. I don't know how many, we go say how many car canopy it was, probably, I don't know, 20, maybe 18, 16. I decided to tear it down. And so I ended up giving it to my dad, and he built a nice big machine shed out of it. That was one of the toughest things I decided to do.
Huh.
It just built the thing and then have to tear down and start a whole different direction and go to the drive-through window. And because we had the foresight to put a drive-through window in, but that's when we went total drive-through. So that was one of the toughest ones. There were some other really tough ones, letting people go that didn't need to be there. That was a tough situation, always hard. But I enjoyed listening to some of your podcasts from before, and you look out for those that are even not fit for where they are in your organization, but to do it to help them out in a sense, encourage them to go this direction, a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that helped me a lot there is somebody that's not successful in your organization. They're not magically going to become successful.
Right.
And so, nobody likes to be underperforming. Nobody likes to always be criticized or kind of, under the gun. Mm-hmm. And so limping them along, there might be another organization, another job, another industry where they could be very successful. Mm-hmm. There might be the opportunity for a lesson to be learned along the way. And so by keeping somebody that you know is never going to be a fit, it's actually a detriment to them.
It is.
And you're just increasing frustration all around.
You are.
And that was a hard thing for me to get. Yeah, it's a hard thing to do, to let someone know that they don't fit in a job and are going to have to find somewhere else to go. And man, I'd always look for any opportunity I had to do anything other than that, trying to put them in a different job, give them some training, talk to them, remind them, train them. You know, like you said, often I knew long before I finally let them go that this wasn't going to work.
Exactly.
Took it on a little too long.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that necessary endings.
That's a good one. Yeah, I think Henry Cloud's probably the person that first started, or he's the first one I've heard of that was really pushing that idea of you're not doing someone a favor by keeping them somewhere they don't fit.
That's exactly right. Yep.
And yeah, I think he was really onto something. I know, oh gosh, it was quite a few weeks ago. We had a guest on that told a story about letting someone go. And a few weeks later, he walked up to him and kind of confronted him and, hey, I need to talk to you. And thank you. Since you let me go, I went to find something that I love, I'm passionate about, I'm thriving. And if you hadn't have fired me, I would have just stayed and been miserable. Yeah, those stories are rare, but I think there's some truth to them.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and, you know, that's how I always tell young people particularly, you don't get respect. You earn respect. And when you're respecting someone that is needing encouragement in to find a different job, that's how you earn it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a right way to do it in a respectful way. And somebody that can have difficult conversations and maintain that respect is a valuable skill. One
of the things that I remember back when the economy really tanked, and I don't remember if it was the financial crisis or the .com crisis. I don't remember which one of those it was.
I've been through a few of those ups and downs and bubbles and busts. So.
But anyway, this church member said that he was looking at his staff and how am I going to eliminate this? And what he did is he sat down and listed all of the staff, and he listed, okay, how much am I willing to pay them to leave? And that kind of gives you a kind of a monetary perspective, at least, on what's it costing you, or.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Well, as you mentioned, hey, you've been through a lot of ups and downs. Can you think of a moment when you were most afraid as a leader?
No, can't. I think I lost a lot of sleep over having my kids work for me. That was a difficult time there. And Jan, bless her heart, she's been with me through all of this. And, you know, we leaned on each other a lot. And I think that our faith has been huge in getting through those really, really tough times. You know, the times when I had everything mortgaged to the limit, that was scary. I'll never forget this situation when I was with my accountant, and I was just telling him about how the challenges I was facing. And he says, and this is when I had two going businesses. And he says, I don't know anybody that wished they were Bob Zimmerschied. And so I know that things were tough then. You know, if I didn't know it, it was showing.
Yeah. Huh. Oh, man. And how long did it take you to dig out of that when you had two going businesses and everything mortgaged and things just weren't going well? What did it take to fight out of that hole?
Well, I'm not sure how that all came about to get out of that hole. I mean, just steady, making sure, you know, I'll never forget one of the air conditioners on the roof was acting up, and that worried me, because how can you have a pleasant dining experience when it's, you know, 95 degrees inside your restaurant? And so I just tried to make things work the best I could, you know. I just didn't give up, you know.
Comes back to that grit you were talking about.
Yeah,
earlier.
Absolutely.
Somebody that's willing to spend their weekend sleeping on the floor in a restaurant to start a business. That's not somebody that gives up easily.
No, I didn't. Speaking of that, Angela Duckworth, I think is the name of the author that wrote the book Grit.
Okay.
Yeah. It is not a John Wayne book, but it's a book about grit.
I might have to check that out. I've not heard of that one yet. Was there something that significantly delayed the growth of any of your businesses that you would handle differently if you could go back?
I was seriously undercapitalized. That was the hole to dig out of. And so once I did that, I'm telling you, the sky gets bluer.
Well, when you're not paying 18% interest,
yeah.
You got to make a heck of a profit margin.
You do.
18% interest.
You do. Yeah. Well, and Jan had taught enough years that she had some retirement saved up, and we took that out and put it against the principal of our house. So we had our house pretty well taken care of, and that was and we both had degrees. We felt, and I think that was kind of an arrow in our quiver, so to speak, thinking I could always go back to work somewhere, but that wasn't on my mind much at all. I was just getting ready to tough it out, do what I had to do. And if I had to talk to my banker a lot, I hated to go in and talk to him. Oh, that was terrible. But, they stuck with me.
I was going to say, at least you had a banker that was willing to work with you through it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I shared everything with them. That was one of the things that they knew I was all in. Yeah. And so, and that kind of is, I think when you're playing football or whatever you're doing, if you're in a team, they know you're all in. That makes a big difference. And that was with my employees too. They were so with me. I just appreciate that so much. I couldn't have done it without them. That's for sure.
I know a lot of them are still, or the ones you've had in the last few years are still down at the Ace.
Absolutely.
And doing well with the new owners.
There was a transition there, and it didn't work for everybody. And they have a little different philosophy. But, you've got to be adaptable. And this doesn't matter. Going back to the illustration about the way America's on the move, you've just got to be adaptable and change. But I had several people that worked for me over 20 years, and 30 years. And so that's precious. Those people are gold.
So I've found in the 6 months or so we've been doing this and interviewing people, there's two things that come up in almost every story is the grit or sticking with it. Almost every entrepreneur I talk to, the thing they're most proud of is the fact that they didn't give up. And then there's always a significant pivot, just what you said, the adaptability. And man, do you have any thoughts? How do you determine the things that you got to put your head down and just muscle through? And how do you know when the market's speaking to you and it's time to make a significant pivot and change and adapt?
I think it goes back to, and your mom probably told you this, surround yourself with good people and listen to them. And, two heads are always better than one. And we had this saying in the hardware business, it takes two people to say no. And that means that somebody comes in and says, you got this? And they say, no, you don't do that. It takes two people to say no because you ask somebody else, do we have this? So no one person can know everything. And so that's just, I think one of the things that happened in the hardware business is I joined a group called Research. And that was a group of store owners that met twice a year. And we actually treated each other like we were on their board. We would critique each other's store. We'd visit every store of the membership. And when we were there, we treated like we were the owner of the store and what would we do differently here and what things really stood out to us. And we shared all of our financial information with each other. And so and that all came out on a nice spreadsheet so you could compare where you're at, where you wanted to go. And somebody is doing something really special over here. And it was and we did that with marketing. We did that with financial planning. We did that with a payroll and job descriptions. And it was very helpful. Just surrounding yourself with good people. And I noticed that in A&W, when we started out, those were the best owners. They were successful and they were good quality ideas and philosophy. Just, good, solid people. And then when we got into Coast to Coast, that was the same way. Good people. Just surround yourself with good people. And that was in ACE. It just kept getting better and better. So I used that kind of as a rule of thumb. Okay, who do you ask about this or that? So you just learn from the best people there are. The people that are killing it, that's where you go to.
Yeah. You don't ask broke people for financial advice.
That's right.
Is there an opinion that you once held strongly that you've changed your mind about throughout your career?
Yes, I can say this. I haven't thought about it too much, but since you asked the question, the fact that Jesus is Lord. I struggled with I was baptized early on as a child, but I struggled with that when I started in business. And like I say, I used to teach Sunday school. Well, before I taught Sunday school, I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, and so I just I kind of had the scientific part of me was kind of a stumbling block for me, and my pride was a big stumbling block. And so I think the biggest change that I did was when I decided to get baptized as an adult. And I decided, okay, I'm all in.
Yeah.
And that was a turning point for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Implicit in that statement that Jesus is Lord is, I am not.
Yeah. Exactly right. That's right. And surround yourself with the right people. He's the one.
Good advice. Good advice there. Is there a major mistake that you made that you wish you could have avoided?
Switching to Hardee's. That was my major. I could have sold that store as an A&W. It was a nice store. I mean, we had good feedback from customers, and it was a great concept. And I can talk to people any day of the week pretty much that's came through the A&W. I wish we had an A&W.
I was just going to say, I missed out on A&W. I think you had turned it over to Hardee's by the time I was old enough to be paying attention anyway. Yeah. And I probably would have frequented a lot more if it was an A&W.
Yeah. Well, that root beer, that was just delicious. And then, of course, we had the frosty mugs and root beer freezes and stuff like that. I mean, it was just, that was a season, America is kind of really the 60s were such a great period of time in America. Yeah. And that just fed right into it with the drive-ins. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of an iconic brand, iconic look. Even today, the A&Ws that are around, there's not a lot that has changed as all the other fast food restaurants have updated and changed and done things differently. You kind of still does it the same way.
It's kind of interesting, though, that the demise of the A&W was a franchise. And when you owned a franchise, you had the rights to sell A&W root beer in your market. And they defined it right in the franchise agreement. So the city limits of Buffalo was my market. And then what happened is a big conglomerate bought A&W, and they decided, Pepsi and Coke and Dr. Pepper and all these companies, we need to sell A&W root beer in a can. But how can they legally sell that and infringe on the marketplace of an A&W restaurant? And so that the franchisees banded together. I was part of it. And we all kicked in as much as we could to hire lawyers to fight to keep A&W root beer in the restaurants. We lost. We couldn't fight the big companies. So that's why there's canned and bottled now. You can still go to, I think Grable has a A&W that still probably mixes the root beer like we used to. And it has a different carbonation. So it's smoother, and it's just it's a great product. I can't duplicate it without the right equipment.
Have you ever made a beneficial mistake? Something that was maybe a mistake and cost you at the time, but in hindsight ended up being a valuable lesson or something that moved you ahead?
Yeah. I'll never forget when I started the investment club, and a local gal was a stockbroker. And so I decided I wanted to buy a certain stock. And so I says, hey, buy $1,000 worth of, or whatever, this particular ticker. Well, she put it in, but she ordered the wrong ticker. She didn't understand what it was. But that forced me to be a lot more particular about my communication with her. And I says, I am not. And so I ended up not using that particular broker again, ever. So
communication is a valuable lesson.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So if you could go back to when you were first married, before you first A&W, if you had the option to kind of follow the route that you have with the various businesses and be an entrepreneur, would you do it again?
I sure would. Yeah. You know, that's just, I'll never forget my dad standing up when my mother passed away. And he said, I would have married her. I would do it all again, you know, in spite of all of the challenges in running a ranch and raising kids and just the ups and downs. You learn through those processes, and that's valuable, and it can't be taken away from you, you know. So I would do it all again.
Good answer.
I'll tell you one of the things that I would have learned earlier on, patience. I would have learned a lot, and especially before we adopted our son and daughter. Patience was a huge vacuum in my mind, and I learned to be more patient, but I should have learned it a lot earlier in my life. And working with managers, I'll never forget. I would sit and visit with them and yes, and we'll do this and do this, and then it wouldn't happen. And I remember how frustrated I used to get. I'd get in my pickup and I would pound the seat beside me because I was so frustrated, and the dust would fly. So, no, I wouldn't change a thing.
I think that's probably a trait of most entrepreneurs as well, is we're anxious to, you don't want to wait. You have a vision, you know the path to get there, and we're in execution mode. Sometimes, like you mentioned, there is a God and we're not him.
That's exactly right.
Us. We gotta use other people, wait on other people, wait on the right timing.
Yeah, so. And that's important. So, and whether you're buying stocks or whatever it is, timing is a very critical issue.
Yes, it is.
I read this book by Howard Hamm. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but the title of the book is Game Changer. Okay. That really developed the horizontal drilling over in the Balkan. What a good book that is. I enjoyed that a lot.
I might have to check it out. You've got a few recommendations today that I haven't heard of. So, what has been your biggest win as a leader?
Growing myself. You know, I've come into that business without any background in it, and I think I survived. You know, that's a win.
Yeah.
I made it to where I was able to sell the store, sell all of the stores, and now I'm not sleepless. I don't have any sleepless nights on that behalf.
Yeah.
You know, so, yeah.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah, it is. So growing myself, I'd say that was the answer.
Awesome. Well, I know you brought a few resources and books with you, but what has been your greatest resource to grow as a leader?
I can't say. I think it takes it's like going to a buffet. I think you have to pick up here and there, and you just learn from all of the others as you go along, because there's so much in there. This afternoon before I headed to here, I told Jen, I says, what I have in this bag, you know, I think I have 8 books or so. And I said, if I would have sat down and read all of those, you can't retain it all. You just have to go. And I think those seminars were so powerful. I mean, I had motivation. I was eager to maybe my own detriment sometimes. So eager, not thinking it through, really. But that's where Jan was so helpful to me, well, why are you doing it that way? And I guess I thought that was the way to do it. So I tell you, Zig Ziglar was huge. I had a book called Zig Ziglar's Top Performance, How to Develop Excellence in Yourself and Others. And that was a huge thing. I used that book so much in teaching my managers. Jim Collins, Good to Great. You've probably heard of that one. That's a huge, successful leaders book, getting the right people in the right place in the bus and stuff like that. And whether it's any kind of an organization, whether it's a church or business or your own personal life, you just need to put the right things in the right place. And Eat That Frog, that was a cute little book. Used a lot. And if you got a task, this is what it says. I did the AI here, kind of summarize things. Eat That Frog is about discipline over motivation, prioritization over busyness, and consistent action over perfection. It's short, direct, motivational, and full of repeatable habits that produce quick wins, ideal for anyone who is overwhelmed by to-do lists and entrepreneurs, professional students, anyone who wants to get important things done faster and feel more in control. Many readers report the biggest shift comes from simply identifying their daily frog and eating it first.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good one. Not too long. It looks like
it's just a cute little thing. Print's big and it's got some illustrations in it and stuff. So it's just it's good, and it comes with a little DVD player.
Okay. Yeah, I might have to borrow that one.
This one's looking a little tired, but and another one, Andy Stanley, The Principle of the Path. Oh, that was a good book. I shared that with a lot of graduates when I had an employee or relative that was graduating from high school. I would give them that book. And I had a great little email from a gal that read that book, and she just thanked me for that book. She had it for a few years and then finally found it and read it,
One of those that sat on the shelf for a little while.
Yeah. And then, of course, Patrick Lenciani and The Ideal Team Player. That was a great book, too.
That was a good one. We've done that one not too long ago, and I guess not my business anymore. But
yeah,
that was a fun one to go through as a team.
Absolutely.
What motivates you to keep pushing when things get hard?
Like I said earlier, I think desire for closure. I start something, I want to finish it. Don't leave it undone. One of the guys, the bookkeepers I had, she talked about her dad, and she said he would just give it a lick and a promise. I'm more of I want to finish it, button it up, put a bow on it, be done with it.
Yeah. I think that's a trait I see in a lot of successful leaders and a lot of business owners is you just have to finish it. You have to see it through.
Because the next thing might overwhelm you, and you'll never get back to it.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's something I'm having to figure out now as I slow down a little bit, is that not everything is on a real strict timeline.
Yeah.
Even last summer, I was working on a project around the house that had no deadline. It didn't have to be done. It wasn't going to keep us from using whatever it was I was working on. It was just kind of a little maintenance project, and I was working on it one evening, and I found myself like, I'm going to get it done before dark. Like, I got to finish it tonight. My wife was like, why does it have to be done tonight? I don't know. It doesn't. But it just like, I started it, I'm going to finish it.
That's
and not only am I going to finish it, I'm going to finish it by the arbitrary deadline that I just set for myself. And
Yep. That's motivation right there. Pure and simple.
Oh, man. Was there a major turning point in your career where you felt like, okay, I've made it. I'm not super stressed or pushing the ball uphill anymore, but you kind of felt a comfortable place that you got to?
Well, I don't know. I think I had a totally different idea about that. What I kind of thought about is, and responding to that is, I think when I was baptized as an adult, that's when I felt, okay, I'm not God. I can be myself. I can just do the best I can and let it be.
Yeah, that's a great answer. a spiritual piece rather than a
absolutely.
financial number.
Yeah. I wrestled with the intellectual perception that I had, and I put it to rest.
You know, well, I know you've now sold a few different businesses. Are there any key lessons you learned through the process of selling a business that you might share with a young person that's building a business or looking to make an exit?
Well, I think one of the best things that I did was I hired an appraiser. And because if you're in a good negotiation with a prospective buyer, it's generally hard to put real hard facts together that say, okay, this is worth this much. But you're the one that knows more about it than anybody. And if you get the appraisal, and if it doesn't fit with how you sense that the true value is, then you can get another appraisal. And it's just an important part to do that, I think. For me, it was really important. And that way I felt comfortable. I knew right where I needed to be. And there was very little argument when it come time to say, okay, this is the price and this is what I expect to get. And I can tell you why I think that.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially that can be a pretty emotional time. So having that third party to be able to objectively look at something is probably pretty helpful.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. Sorry, I jumped ahead there. That probably was an emotional process, especially your latest exit with Ace. That was kind of the pinnacle of your career. What emotions did you wrestle with, or what questions did you have to answer for yourself in the process of deciding to sell and retire?
Well, selling the restaurant was, my heart was with the employees that I left. My heart was there. And that was the way it was with the Ace store too. And it's taken me to see, we've been out of it now for a year and a half or so, maybe a little more than that. It was Easter morning that we sold the store 2 years ago. So, and it's taken me a long time to just feel comfortable that I am not responsible for the store. And the owners, they wanted my feedback. Anytime you see something going bad, let me know, And so that's just been an important. I knew that I had the right people because they want to hear my feedback on how it's going. And so that's been helping the peace in my mind to know that it's going to go on. But I still go to the store, and I don't have my Ace jacket on now, but I go into the store and customers will come up and, well, where's this? Or what's this? Or what do you think about this? And I said, well, I tell you, there's somebody right over there that can help you with that.
I bet it feels nice to be able to give them that answer.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. In my mind, I started preparing. Oh my gosh. Well, like I told you, I bet in my mind, I've been getting ready to sell for 10 years or maybe more. Because I didn't think it would take that long. I really didn't. But it does.
Yeah. It can take a while.
But it's if the right thing happens, I had other people who tried to buy the store, and we got into some of the weeds and the details, and it just wasn't right. So we just didn't do that. But if you got a good business, it's easy to sell. I mean, you've got options. You really do. Now, if you run into a medical problem or something like that, where you've got some issues there that your time frame gets shortened up. I was so blessed not to have any of that happen. And Jan was ready to sell quite a while before I was.
Do you ever second guess that decision?
Not at all. Not now. Nope.
Good deal. Well, this is my absolute favorite question. You've mentioned your faith a few times and that you're a follower of Jesus. How has that impacted your leadership journey?
I say it has everything to do with it. You know, he promised to be with us, and he is. And so that's huge. You're not by yourself. You're not God. He is. And if you, it's just, you know, one of the things that I was really blessed with was my grandmother and her optimism. She is the most optimistic person I can ever remember. And I think that she instilled that in me. Being a Christian, if you're not optimistic as a Christian, you need to study a little more because you've got the best of everything going for you. The best there is.
Yeah.
And so I just feel that that's an optimistic point of view. And that's why it's valuable. And if you're optimistic about today and tomorrow and the future is guaranteed, wow, what else can you say, you know? You don't want to give up that optimism, that's for sure, because it's fuel for the motivation. It's fuel for the everything you do for life.
Good answer. Good answer. So what's next? What do you got on the horizon? I know you're finishing up a shop to go with the new home that you guys just built and moved into. What are your plans for retirement?
Well, I've got a camper and I love camping. And so I've been making reservations for the summer. And because I do have my shop, so I can, you know, this is going to be an exciting winter, next winter. Because when I get done camping, I just pull my camper in the shop. I don't have to winterize it. It's just going to be cozy and it's okay.
Perfect. It grows that camping season a little bit too if you can push their limits a little more. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm really blessed to have that shop, and I am enjoying doing. I just like working with my hands, and it gives me a place to do that. I mean, I have a good sized garage, so I can work in my shop in my garage too. And I'm optimistic, you know, and so it doesn't matter what I'm going to do. I'm just ready to go.
Good deal. Well, you said you made a few reservations already. What's the place that you're most excited to visit this summer?
I would say South Fork up there. Jan and I really are interested in picking the spot we like the best.
Yeah. And
so I've got reservations in there, and you have to make them 6 months in advance, and you got to compete for that spot.
Yep.
And so
it wasn't that way prior to 2020.
Wasn't it? No. You probably just show up and you could get it, you know.
It wasn't very many years ago. You just go find the spot you want and park in it and find the camp host. And man, 2020, it just like, if you're not booking your spaces in January, you're out of luck.
We're going to camp in Spearfish, and we've been camping every year at the RJ Resort there in Hill City. And we meet Jan's brother and his wife, and sometimes their kids show up and sometimes our kids show up. And so it's just a great place they got a great big open meadow there where we camp, and you can fly on an RC airplane out there. And it's just a great setting. And then at night, if you hear the sirens go by with the ambulance or something like that, it tunes up the coyotes, and you listen closely and you can hear coyotes.
Okay.
They're very sensitive to sirens.
Yeah. Well, is there anybody that you'd like to see on the show? Somebody that works in an interesting industry, has a really cool story, something you might like to learn more about?
Yeah, there is. I think before I'd throw out the name, though, I might just visit with him a little bit. But I have a guy that I think would be great on the show. He is a Christian, and he's been very successful at what he does. And he's had a very background, too, in different industries.
Yeah.
Establishments.
Wonderful. Well, if you chat with him and
I'll chat with him,
want to make an introduction, we're always looking for interesting stories and interesting people. And then our last question, we wrap up every show to either fuel or settle the debate. If you have a job to do and have to use a cordless tool, which brand do you prefer?
Well, you know, I sold a lot of hand tools, cordless hand tools. And that's one of the things about being an Ace Hardware store and thinking about the consumer. First of all, you want to buy from a friendly person, and you want to buy something that they've got your back. And if it doesn't work, you can take it back, and they're going to be good with that. They're not going to quiz you about what you did with it. And we've had a number of times when people would come in, buy something, take it home, use it, and bring it back, because they got the job done.
Yep.
Well, hand tools are kind of a wonderful invention. Beautiful, convenient, great productive kind of a thing. But I have changed my theory about that. I've gone from yellow to red. I'm a Milwaukee fan. And Milwaukee has really jumped into the cordless power stuff. I have a cordless vacuum, and that's just handy as a pocket on a shirt. The Dustbuster works really good, but this baby has got some suction on it, so it's really handy. But I vote for Milwaukee, although I still have a lot of DeWalt stuff. But I line up all the chargers, and I can pick what I want.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure. Man, with the life you've lived and the varied experiences you have, you've got a lot of wisdom to offer and a lot of great stories. So I really appreciate you making the time and joining us.
Well, I am excited for you, Eric. This is a great project. And, stories that I've listened to, it's just, started with your dad. I thought that was great. And so many of those podcasts, it's encouragement. That's what it is. It's kind of like surrounding yourself with good people. And so I enjoy those a lot. And I don't know if I got subscribed or not, but I'm going to subscribe. I might want to not subscribe to this particular one.
Okay.
So I won't tell anybody about it if you don't.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, thank you guys for joining us here on From the Ground Up Show. Again, if you like the content, please like, share, subscribe, follow, all of the things. If you haven't found us on YouTube, shows are available in full HD video on YouTube. And if you guys would, make sure you subscribe and click that auto download. Making sure we get that download right away every week really helps move things up. Again, if you would leave a comment or a 5-star review, that helps move us up in the algorithms and get the content out there. So until next time, keep grinding.